So, folks, take your seats. It's time to start the second day of the big meet here at wonderful home of ours, Epicenter. So, yesterday we thanked a lot of our large major partners up on stage and asked them what they thought about or their expectations for the coming days. And I would like to start by giving a little shout out to a couple of other partners that we have here today. The regions of Skåne and Halland, the southern powerhouses of food in Sweden. You will find them downstairs. Go talk to them. I mean, they're just awesome people, almost as awesome as we are in Stockholm, and that is pretty awesome. And I'd also like to give a shout out to the delegation from Israel. You'll also find them downstairs, plus of course companies coming here. You will have Nadav Berger from Peakbridge also giving you a roundup of what's happening in Israel, one of the hotspots for food tech, later on today at the disruption stage downstairs. Also, the San Francisco team, the delegation coming here with all these top-notch chefs that will also have a cookout a little later on during the day. I think it's about 1 o'clock or so. Let's get back to that. Also, Iceland, that is represented here by wonderful ladies coming in here to scout for the next-gen food tech companies. And relatively speaking to its population size, Iceland is by far largest delegation here. Now, talking about Iceland, we have, of course, the topic of the Nordics here. And could you please join me on stage, Anna-Lisa Winter here from the Nordic Food Tech Podcast. And a big round of applause for Anna-Lisa. So, Annalisa, I think it's so fun to have you here with me on stage, and thank you so much for yesterday, where you basically moderated the entire day at the disruption stage.
Me and Daniel Rubin, who, excuse me, if you don't know Daniel, he has a newsletter called Food Tech Weekly. So him and I have been hanging out downstairs on the disruption stage, talking a lot about the startups, and we're going to start again around 11 today. So you'll see me there too, but yes.
Okay, wonderful. So what did you take away from yesterday?
I think one thing that was so interesting is a lot of times when startups pitch, they are like, we're the new Uber, we're the new Airbnb. And the tagline that I kept hearing again and again is we're the put the food ingredient without the actual food ingredient as we know it. So there seems to be a really strong trend in that space. And then there was a lot within the blue economy as well, and a lot of consumer-facing products.
Yep, the blue economy is coming strongly. So, and you've seen, of course, all this. I'm like, you have a treasure trove of knowledge of the Nordic food system, because you have over the past, I don't know how many years now, interviewed, I don't know how many, for your podcast.
Yeah, so just to explain who I am, my name is Annalisa. I'm half Danish and half American, and I run this thing called the Nordic Food Tech Podcast. I've been running guerrilla marketing downstairs, so if you come sit at the disruption stage, you're going to sit with my card, and you can check out the show from there with the QR code. But I got into food about 5 years ago, and I actually started working for Pink, which is the Paulig incubator. They're also running around in the audience somewhere. But my job was to do corporate venture scouting. So I was looking at what is the future of taste, and then having to speak across the supply chain to all different kinds of actors. And I very quickly realized that the food tech ecosystem was not nearly as developed as the tech ecosystem. And it wasn't just in Denmark between Aarhus and Odense and Copenhagen. It was also between Stockholm and Copenhagen and Norway and Iceland. There were very different ecosystems with different strengths and weaknesses, but nobody was speaking. So I was, like you, a connector, and I got to talk to everyone. And then I spent a ton of time writing emails at night trying to bring people together. And I realized I was my own bottleneck. So there's only so much you can do as one person. And then I thought, well, what if we record these stories of role models and individuals who are really trying to create the future through food, and then we kind of democratize that access to knowledge to enable peer-to-peer knowledge sharing. So that's the whole point of the show. We've done over 80 episodes now, so I always say if you give me a topic, I can tell you how it relates to food. Food is at the basis of literally everything. And that's why I'm so excited to be here, because I always rave about your event that collaboration is key, and you bring together, we just heard, Israel, Iceland, San Francisco, all the Nordic nations. We're all here in this room, and that's such a unique opportunity. There's not a lot of places for that.
And I think it's also a unique opportunity to listen to your podcast, because that's what you do too. You bring everyone together in the same podcast. So tell me, what type of people have you met over the years?
So I'm very focused on how do we hear all of the different perspectives of the food system. So that's everything from the farmer to the really high tech stuff, but also the aquaculture sector. They hang out at very different conferences than we go to. And, you know, the same with the political guys versus the investors versus the really corporate people. So I always have 4 questions that I ask in every single episode at the very end. And that's, what's your vision for the future in 10 to 15 years? What are we missing to get there? What collaborations are you looking for? And how can someone get in touch? And the idea is that in the Nordics, we tend to be a little bit shy. And there's this thing called Jentelaw that we're well known for, that we're not always the fastest to reach out. But if you hear someone's story and know what their vision for the future is and their values are, it makes it that much easier to get in touch, and it makes it not a cold lead, but a warm lead. And I interviewed you. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah,
it was
I
a
do,
few
I
years
do.
ago. But do you remember what you talked about as your future vision?
No, actually, I don't remember.
I will tell you. It was about the Internet of Things as it relates to the future of food.
Oh, yes, that
And
was the
so
one.
much around digitization, which is interesting because even when I'm going around here, it feels like there's a lot we can do around the data flows and the knowledge flows, and especially around food waste and how to really match make where food is coming from, how to make it more efficient, how to upcycle it. But everything around data is still, when I went through and read all the transcripts again, I thought that's still an area where we have a lot to move. Like, there's a long way to go there.
It is a long way to go. And I think it's conceptually really hard for people to connect something that's so deeply entrenched as
Yeah.
food, as a physical object, and connect that to data. But I do think I see a lot of traction in that area. Not as much as I would like, but then again, never is anywhere to my liking. You always have to go further, right?
Totally.
And
And if I can just add, I know that you're working a lot with the city of Stockholm, and I interviewed the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and C40 Cities, which are very focused on what can cities do as procurement centers, as hubs for para-agriculture, where they just have a huge demand and they can be a feedback loop. And one of the things I heard is that there isn't a great system for them to see how much food is coming into the city, how much is going out. And I wonder if you've found any solutions in that space or seen anything there yet.
no, I think the answer to that one is probably open data in one way or another. But that, of course, also requires standards and people coming together, uniting on their views on data. Right?
Collaboration,
Collaboration.
right?
And
It's literally at the basis of everything.
it is, and
Yeah.
then you have to connect people, stuff like you do. So tell me, what more have you learned over these years? I mean,
So when I look at what everyone has said around their future vision for the food system, and why I even think that's important is that if we don't have a North Star we're all working towards, then how do we all go about our parallel activities and make sure it's adding up to the greater whole? But the common thread that I see is that people would like to see a food system that is affordable, accessible, healthy for the people and the planet, and then nutritious. And however we get there, whatever that looks like, that's kind of the big themes. I would say a rising theme is biodiversity, and then the idea of regenerative agriculture and circular systems, and then so much around this idea of data and efficiency. And then there's all the challenges. That's the next question I ask of, well, how do we actually do this? You know, it's a nice thing to talk about, but how do you put it into action? And there's a big question around, is it going to be government that drives this, or is it going to be the financial business models and really the economic incentives? And I'm going to do a podcast later today with a couple people in this room, and they had some very smart points saying, well, it's going to be both, but at the end of the day, we need to make the true cost of food make way more sense than it does right now, because food is way too cheap for what it is and what it takes and all the resources you have to factor in. So I think there's a lot there. There's a lot around mindset, communication, how we frame sustainability, the language. So there's a lot of topics. I'm working now on trying to cohesively write this down to share it with everyone because it lives in my head, but it's not. It's
so
a lot
there's
of work
a book
to listen
coming
to
out
80.
or something like that.
Maybe a book, at least some talks and some
Yeah. Okay.
other way of digesting
That's
this.
cool. Of all the people you've interviewed so far, are there any specific ones that stick out?
You know, I'm deeply fascinated by some of the really big players who don't always come out to play, but are so important to the system, like the big fertilizer companies. It took me maybe 6 months to prepare to interview Yara, which is the big Norwegian fertilizer company, because fertilizer has been historically such a touchy topic. It's helped us to feed the world and get out of famine, but it also leads to a lot of environmental degradation. So I find those topics really fascinating. I think the whole area of seaweed is fascinating. We only eat 3% of what's in the oceans, so there's so much we can do there. Personalized nutrition is another nut that has yet to be cracked. And I'm about to release one on water. That's another huge thing. Water is a crisis that's happening around the world. I know the Stockholm Resilience Center just said we exceeded our planetary boundary of water. So how does that relate to food and agriculture and the waste processes and everything else? So
there are so many things that are interconnected here.
you can hear I can go on. I'm like,
yeah, you can go. And I think we should listen to you, and we will hear more from you later on today from the disruption stage. But when it comes to the Nordics, what do you think that the Nordics bring to the table? I mean, you sit and watch this from the outside with an insider perspective as well, of course.
I think the Nordics each country has different strengths. So there's definitely something around fish and that we can do a lot more. One of the best things I've heard about how the Nordics think about food is that when you go to other parts of the world and tap into their ecosystem, we have such a strong focus on sustainability, and you'll hear it down at the pitches downstairs. Everyone talks about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, at least at some point in their presentation. And when you go other places, that concept isn't baked in the same way that it is here. So we take our point of departure in how are we trying to create something that really has sustainability in mind. And then I think we are a little bit more tech focused in like controlled agriculture, environment agriculture, because our environments are so harsh. And for a long time, we were very poor and we had to kind of make the most of what we had, which is also why I think we're doing a lot with fermentation. So the other area that we have not totally tapped into is merging our biotech and food tech clusters along with the agriculture we have. And I think we're going to see more there, but that convergence is one that, again, will take a lot of collaboration and people talking to each other to really see.
Interesting. What do you think about other companies from outside the traditional food value chain coming into food?
Meaning companies
like
that want to get in?
Yeah, it could be the data companies, telcos, or other players. Have you seen a lot of that movement out there?
Well, all of them are in food because they feed their people, and that's obviously something important. And I know there's a lot of telecoms that are working with how do we give farmers data in their fields? So we actually need to get internet to rural areas so that they can hook up their tractor to be part of the Internet of Things. Or we can do the precision agriculture. We can understand how this actually works. Land O'Lakes in the U.S. is doing a whole big thing to try and get internet throughout all of the U.S. because they see that their farmers need that to really be able to grow their businesses. So there are opportunities for collaboration there, but I don't think the telco is maybe the one driving it. It's from another side of the, I mean, I'm not an expert in it, but I have not yet heard of a company like that that's doing something.
Okay. So what do you say about the development speed in the Nordics compared to other places? I mean, like we see, of course, Israel moving ahead at rocket speed, and San Francisco and the Silicon Valley people are as well, right? So
I will take the example of all of the Nordic companies who have been on little accelerator programs to Israel. And I interviewed the Innovation Center of Denmark that was trying to facilitate these learning expeditions. And they said they had a big problem with the Nordic countries because when you go to Israel, it's very normal that you meet someone and you take a meeting the next day. And it goes super quick. But here, the startups would get the email, but they wouldn't answer for 5 days because here we have a longer response time, or it's okay to take a while. Whereas in other communities, it's just a faster thing to get the meeting, to take the meeting. And I experience it too, that I'll say, hey, should we meet up? And it would take a month out from now to actually get something on the books. So in that sense, the pace of collaboration is slower. And I think we have a lot more opportunity to pay it forward. So when you study innovation clusters and what makes them very successful, a big part is people being willing to share knowledge and then also talk to each other and say, oh, Johan, you're interested in this. I know a guy. Let me put you in touch and open that door for you. And there's so much we can do in that regard to talk across the aisle, talk to the person behind you, ask what help they need. But then also, if you're an investor, if it's not a deal for you, pass it on to your friend. It's okay to say it's not for me, but maybe it's for someone else. And how do we move that just a little bit?
Okay, so the notion of the open, tightly knit societies actually will play out well for the Nordics in food tech.
And I find we always talk about the Nordics having kind of a flat hierarchy and that it's very easy for us to collaborate because we're so tiny. Like, it's not hard for me to walk into the Parliament building. I can actually go and just listen to a talk if I want to. So the degrees of separation to the most powerful people are not very far, yet it doesn't feel like we're all talking together, at least not to me. It still feels like it's very far compared to some other places where they're engaging more. And I'd love to debate this with people if you have a different opinion. This is totally my point of view. But I find that interesting that we toot this value of collaboration and equal access, but to me that doesn't always feel like we're really using it.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I must say that this is also something that I've noticed in the world of food. Actually, that the world of food, for you people here coming from the world of food, you feel sometimes pretty isolated in your own little bubble.
Yeah.
And I think you need to unlock that, pop that bubble and get out there and start communicating with others out. Well, there are a lot of things that could be said about the Nordics, and we could debate this for hours and hours, but our time is up,
Yes.
Annalisa. Thank you so much for joining me on
Thank you,
stage.
and come join us at the disruption stage a little later. We'll
They
see
will.
you there.
Talking about cooperation, let's bring Robert Jones from Mosa Meetup on stage to talk about